What is the difference between Phoenicia and Rome? Between the Soviet Union and the British Empire? Between modern America and modern China? The obvious answer would be one regarding ideology, different outlooks on how society should be governed, and from those outlooks, different methods of governance. But the ideological interpretation of society often fails to strike at the heart of what truly makes political and economic bodies different. In his phenomenal book, The Foundations of Geopolitics, Alexander Dugin theorizes that there are two different ways for vast political projects to exert power. These two ways of exertion and growth deriving their power from two different sources. For Dugin, an expansive political body, based on its geography, will either take the form of a maritime empire, which Dugin, drawing on the geopolitical theorist before him, refers to as thalassocracies, literally sea controlling, or a political body can take the form of what Dugin calls a tellurocracy, or a land empire. What distinguishes these two forms of state? At the most basic level, the answer to this question lies in the names themselves. A maritime empire centers its political power around a body of water. A land empire is rooted internally to a particular continental landmass. Different geography, different orientations. While that might create a picture in your mind of the inevitable differences that develop between these types of states, it is probably only a vague one. So let's ask another question. What are the results of these different orientations in regards, firstly, to their structures? First, let's talk about sea empires. Political entities that control large bodies of water obviously exert that control for particular reasons. They obviously want to use these bodies of water for their own benefit. And they do that primarily through trade, colonialism, and mercantilism. The absence of centralization around a particular landmass inhibits the sea empire from producing its own goods, so it acts as an intermediary between states that are capable of doing so. Through its control over the sea, it charts out and establishes trade routes that are often far more efficient than inland trade routes. In the process of establishing these trade routes, it can often establish a colonial presence in the states with which it trades, using a naval superiority to overcome its competition and establishing for itself a monopoly over the means by which the soon-to-be colonized state can export its goods. This monopoly over trade by a foreign power then leads to the sea empire gaining some position of authority in the government of the producing nation, transforming it from a state of its own to a colonial vassal of the sea empire, the profits from which go first and foremost to its coastal capitals. Land empires, on the contrary, are production-oriented rather than trade-oriented, utilizing their access to the raw materials of a given continent as the basis of their power and expansion. Their expansion also differs in that, rather than the naval superiority and domination over trade first and foremost we see in sea empires, a land empire can only expand through the integration, either peacefully or through conquest, of neighboring communities. This puts a limit on their capacity for expansion that doesn't exist for the sea empire. A sea empire can span the globe, limited only by its inability to move inward very far beyond coastal trade hubs, while a land empire is limited by continental geography. If one were to look at a map of a sea empire, it would look like a series of dots and lines of trade routes connecting to a central hub, while a map of a land empire would look like one vast shape, its borders primarily defined by features of local geography. Another distinction would be the absence of colonialism in land empires, resulting from the fact that a land empire must integrate a conquered community into the political body of the empire, a trait which does not limit the sea empire, whose center of governance lies far outside the reach of the states it gains a trade monopoly over. That covers most of the structural differences, the differences in base as opposed to the differences in a superstructure of these types of states. But how does the difference in base translate over to the difference in superstructure? The primary difference between the ideological content of these two types of states are also analogous to the essence of the bodies that they base themselves around. For the sea empire, the ideological form tends towards liberalism, a fluidity in thought that is critical of firm convictions and long-established tradition. Such an attitude is essential, as a sea empire is inevitably going to come into contact with radically different people, with radically different ways of life and social norms and customs, many of which stand in the way of the expansion of the sea empire's market dominance. In an effort to justify and aid in the expansion of this market dominance, the Sea Empire develops an ideology that seeks to dissolve difference in tradition in favor of an individualism wherein the subject is freed from traditional restrictions, social obligation, and morality, his value derived primarily from his participation in the market. Land empires embrace a more rigid and firm ideological structure, analogous to the firmness of the mountain and plains out of which they spawn. In land empires, tradition, collectivism, authority, and religion are valued above the individual as something eternal and immutable, unlike the temporary subject. Sea empires in the modern era have tended towards capitalism, individualism, and liberal democracy. Land empires in the modern era towards socialism, communism, and what ideologues of the West tend to refer to as authoritarianism. Alexander Dugin sees in China, Iran, and Russia the development of a new block of land empires, standing in opposition to the dominant sea empire of our time, the globalist bloc, centered around the Atlantic Ocean, which Dugin sometimes refers to as Atlantis, but which, absent the mystical language Dugin is drawn to, is the international alliance of the United States government and the EU. Dugin obviously has a bias in favor of land empires, and it is not an unfounded one for someone who values tradition and community. And he does see evil in the sea empire led by the United States, dominated by coastal elites with no respect for God or their countrymen. But that does not mean that all hope is gone for America, the dominant sea empire of our time. In his book, The Great Reset versus the Great Awakening, Dugin acknowledges that the rise of Western populist leaders like Donald Trump signal a popular opposition to globalism, and along with the opposition to globalism, America as a sea empire. And when one looks at where Trump is most popular and where he is least popular, one will find that his support comes from the continental center of the United States, and his opposition from the coasts. Does this not imply that America is capable of embracing a place among Dugin's new block of land empires, especially in the face of the decay of America's global sea empire? Only time will tell. As always, thanks for watching. God bless.